Chapter 2 Cain. Rescue from my tortures came from an altogether unexpected quarter, and along with it, something new came into my life, something that has affected it to this very day. Shortly before this time, a new pupil had been enrolled in our grammar school. He was the son of a well to do widow who had moved to our town, and he wore a crepe band on his sleeve. He was in a higher grade than I was, and he was several years older, but he soon caught my attention, as he did everybody's. This remarkable pupil seemed to be much older than he looked. No one got the impression that he was just a boy. In the midst of a childish crowd, he moved about like a stranger, as mature as a man, or rather a gentleman. He wasn't popular. He didn't take part in our games, let alone our fights. The only thing about him the rest of us liked was the self confident, firm tone in which he addressed the teachers. His name was Max Demian. It happened one day, as it did occasionally in our school, that for some reason or other a second class was placed in our very large classroom. It was Demian's class. We younger ones had Bible history, the older ones had to write an essay. While the story of Cain and Abel was being hammered into us, I glanced over at Demian many times. His face had a strange fascination for me, and I saw that clever, bright, unusually mature face bent over his work attentively and intelligently. He didn't look at all like a schoolboy doing an assignment, but like a scholar pursuing his own research. I didn't find him pleasant, to tell the truth. On the contrary, I had something against him. He was too superior and cool to suit me. I found him too provokingly self confident by nature, and his eyes had that grown up expression that children never like, a little sad, with flashes of mockery in it. And yet I had to look at him again and again, whether I liked him or not. But when he glanced at me once, I immediately looked away in fright. When I think today about his appearance then as a schoolboy, I can say in every aspect and respect he was different from the rest. He was thoroughly original and individual and attracted attention that way. Yet at the same time, he did all he could not to attract attention. He bore and behaved himself like a prince in disguise in the midst of farm boys, making every effort to resemble them. On the way home from school, he walked behind me. After the others had scattered, he caught up with me and said hello. His greeting, too, even though he was imitating our schoolboy manner, was just as grown up and courteous. Can we walk a ways together? He asked amicably. I was flattered and nodded yes. Then I described my house to him. Oh, there, he said with a smile. I already know that house. Over your door, there's a peculiar thing fixed to the wall. It interested me right off. At first, I didn't know what he meant, and I was amazed that he seemed to know our house better than I did. Yes, as a keystone over the entrance arch, there was a kind of coat of arms, but in the course of time it had been worn away and had frequently been painted over. As far as I knew, it had nothing to do with our family. I don't know anything about it, I said timidly. It's a bird or something of the sort. It must be very old. They say the house was once part of the monastery. That may well be, he nodded. Just take a good look at it. Things like that are often interesting. I think it's the sparrowhawk. We kept walking. I was quite intrigued. Suddenly, Demian laughed as if something had struck him as funny. Yes, I was there during your lesson, he said animatedly. The story of Cain, who had a mark on his forehead, right? Do you like it? No, I had really liked any part of all the stuff we had to learn, but I didn't dare say so. It was as if an adult were talking with me. I said I liked the story fine. Demian tapped me on the shoulder. You don't have to be pretend with me, friend. But the story is actually very peculiar. I think it's much more peculiar than most others that occur in the course. In fact, the teacher didn't say much about it. merely the usual remarks about God, sin, and so forth. But I think he broke off, smiled, and asked, "But does this interest you?" "Well, then," he resumed, "I think this story of Cain can be understood in a completely different way. Most of the things we are taught are certainly quite true and correct, but they can also all be viewed in a different way from the teachers, and then they generally make much better sense. For instance, it's very hard to be satisfied with this Cain and the mark on his forehead the way it's explained to us. Don't you think so? That someone kills his brother during an argument, yes, that can certainly happen. And that he gets scared afterward and climbs down a peg, that's possible too. But that he is specially rewarded for his cowardice with a medal of distinction that protects him and frightens everyone else is really odd, you must admit. Of course, I said, showing interest. The subject was beginning to entrance me. But how can you explain the story differently? He tapped my shoulder. Very simply. What actually existed and gave rise to the story in the first place was the mark. There was a man with something on his face that frightened others. They didn't dare touch him. He made an impression on them, he and his children. Maybe or certainly there wasn't really a mark on his forehead like a postmark in real life. Things are really that crude. Surely it was something strange that was barely noticeable. A little more intelligence and a daring in his eyes than people were used to. This man had power. People shield away from this man. He had a mark. They explained it any way they wanted, and they always want what's convenient for them and puts them in the right. They were afraid of the children of Cain who possessed a mark. And so they explained the mark not for what it was, as a distinction, but as the opposite. They said that fellows with that mark were weird, and so they were. People with courage and character always seem weird to other people. It was very uncomfortable to have a race of fearless, weird people running around. So now they hung a nickname on that race and made up a story about it in order to take revenge on it, in order to be compensated to some extent for all the fear they had undergone. Understand? Yes, that is in the case. Cain wasn't evil at all. And the whole story in the Bible is actually completely untrue. Yes or no? Stories that are so old, so very ancient, are always true, but they aren't always correctly noted down and explained. In short, I think Cain was a terrific guy, and people made up that story about him just because they were afraid of him. The story was simply a rumor, something that people bandy around in their gossip. It was true to the extent that Cain and his children really bore a kind of mark and were different from most people. I was completely amazed. "And so you think the part about the murder isn't true either?" I asked in my consuming interest. "Oh, yes, it's certainly true. The strong man killed a weak man. Whether it was really his brother may be doubted. It's unimportant. When you come down to it, all men are brothers, and so a strong man murdered a weak man. Maybe it was a heroic deed, maybe not. But in any case, the other weak men were now terror stricken. They lamented loudly, and when they were asked, "Why don't you just kill him too?" they didn't say, "Because we are cowards." They said, "We can't. He's got the mark. God has set a mark on him. The hoax must have started in some such way. Oh, I'm holding you up so long." He turned into Old Street and left me alone, more puzzled than I had ever been. The moment he was gone, I found everything he had said totally unbelievable. Cain, a noble person, Abel, a coward. The mark of Cain was a distinction. It was absurd. It was blasphemous and wicked. Where was God in all of this? Hadn't he accepted Abel's sacrifice? Didn't he love Abel? No, this was nonsense. And I suppose that demon had been pulling my leg and sending me up the garden path. To be sure, he was a damned clever fellow and he could talk, but all this no. And yet I had never before thought so much about any story from the Bible or elsewhere. And for a long time, I hadn't forgotten Franz Cromer so completely, hours at a time, for a whole evening. At home, I read through the story again as it stood in the Bible. It was short and clear, and to look for some special secret interpretation was totally crazy. Then any murderer could claim to be God's favorite. No, that was nonsense. The only good thing about it was the way that Damien could come out with such a theory so readily and neatly, as if it were all self evident, and with that look in his eyes to boot. In truth, my own existence wasn't totally in order. In fact, it was in great disarray. I had lived in a bright, clean world. I myself had been a sort of Abel, and now I was so deep in the other element, I had fallen sunk so low, and yet basically I couldn't do much to help myself. How did things stand in the quarter? Yes, now a memory flashed through my head that almost took my breath away for a minute. On that terrible evening when my present misery had begun, that incident with my father had taken place for the space of a moment I had suddenly seemed to see through and to despise him and his bright world and wisdom. Yes, then I myself, in the role of Cain and bearing his mark, had imagined that the mark was no shame but a distinction, and that through my malice and wretchedness I ranked above my father, above good and pious men. At the time, I didn't experience the matter with such clarity of thought, but all these elements were included in it. It was a simple fearing of emotions, of strange feelings that gave me pain and yet filled me with pride. When I thought things over, how oddly Damien had spoken about the fearless and the cowardly, how strangely he had interpreted the mark on Cain's forehead, and as he did so, how peculiarly his remarkable eyes had glistened, those grown up eyes. And it darted vaguely through my head. This Damien, isn't he himself a sort of Cain? Why does he defend him if he doesn't feel similar to him? Why does he have that power in his gaze? Why does he speak so scornfully about the others, the timorous people, who after all are the pious, those in whom God takes pleasure? I couldn't think these thoughts through to any conclusion. A stone had fallen into the well, and the well was my young soul. And for a very long time, this matter of Cain, the murder and the mark was the point of origin of all my attempts at gaining knowledge, formulating doubts, and examining things critically. I noticed that the other pupils were very preoccupied with Demian too. I hadn't told anyone about the incident concerning Cain, but he seemed to interest others as well. At any rate, a lot of rumors about the new boy began to circulate. If I only still recalled all of them, they would shed some light on him. Each of them could be interpreted. All I still recall is that the first bit of gossip was that Demian's mother was very rich. People also said that she never went to church, and nor her son either. Rumor had it that they were Jews, or else they might be crypto Muslims. Further tales were told about Max Demian's physical strength. What was certain was that when the strongest boy in his class challenged him to a fight and called him a coward when he refused, Demian inflicted a stunning humiliation on him. Those who were present said that Demian had merely taken him by the neck with one hand and squeezed tight. Then the boy turned pale, and afterward he sneaked away and for days was unable to use his arm. For the space of an evening, people even said that he had died. Everything was claimed for a while, everything was believed, everything was exciting and marvelous. Then people had enough for a time. But not long afterward, new rumors arose among us schoolboys, some of whom felt free to report that Jimian had intimate relations with girls and knew all there was to know. Meanwhile, my involvement with Franz Cromer pursued its inevitable course. I couldn't shake him off. Even if he occasionally left me in peace for days at a time, I was still bound to him. He participated in my dreams like my shadow. And whatever harm he didn't did to me, in reality, my imagination led him to in those dreams, in which I was his abject slave. I lived in those dreams. I was always a heavy dreamer, more than in real life. Those shadows confused my strength and life. Among other things, I frequently dreamed that Cromer was beating me, spitting on me, and kneeling on me, and what was worse, that he lured me on to commit serious crimes. No, not so much lured me as simply forced me by means of his powerful influence. The most frightening of those dreams, from which I awoke half crazy, included a murderous attack on my father. Cromer sharpened a knife and handed it to me. We were standing behind trees in a tree lined avenue, lying in wait for someone. I didn't know whom, but when someone came by and Cromer indicated me to by pressure on my arm that was the person I had to stab, it was my father. Then I awoke. These things, of course, still made me think about Cain and Abel, but not so much about Damien anymore. When he first regained contact with me, it was also in a dream, strangely enough. I was like this. I dreamt again about being beaten and terrorized, but this time instead of Cromer, it was Damien kneeling on me. And this was entirely new and made a strong impression on me. All that Cromer had made me suffer in the way of torture and struggling against it, I accepted from Demian gladly and with an emotion made up just as much of pleasure as of fear. I had this dream twice. Then Cromer returned to his original role. What I experienced in these dreams and what was actuality, I have been unable to distinguish clearly for some time now. In any case, my bad relationship with Cromer took its course and was by no means finished when I had finally paid off the amount owed him by a series of petty thefts. No, now he knew about those thefts because he kept asking me where the money was coming from, and I was more in his power than ever before. He frequently threatened to tell my father everything, and then my anxiety was scarcely as strong as my deep regret at not having done so myself at the very outset. And yet, wretched as I felt, I still didn't regret everything, at least not at the time. At times, I thought I felt things just had to be that way. I was under a cloud of calamity, and it was pointless to try to break out of it. Presumably, my parents suffered a great deal from this state of affairs. A strange spirit had come over me. I no longer belonged in our little community, which had been so intimate and for which I was often assailed by an etching nostalgia as it for lost Edens. I was treated, especially by my mother, more like a sick person than like a villain. But I could best discern the true state of things from the behavior of my two sisters toward me. This behavior, which was extremely considerate and yet made me infinitely miserable, indicated clearly that I was a sort of a possessed person whose condition was more to be pitied than blamed, but nevertheless one in whom evil had taken a precedence. I was aware that I was being prayed for, not in the same way as in the past, and I felt how futile those prayers were. I often ardently perceived a longing for relief, the desire for a proper confession, but I also felt in advance that I would be unable to tell and explain things correctly to either my father or mother. I knew that they would receive my words amicably. They would carefully spare my feelings, in fact, pity me, but they wouldn't fully understand me, and the whole thing would be looked on as a sort of minor infraction, whereas it was actually my fate. I know that many people won't believe that a child not yet 11 is capable of such feelings. It is not to those people that I am telling my story. I am telling it to those who have greater knowledge of humanity. An adult who has learned how to transform part of his emotions into thought processes notices that such thoughts aren't present in a child and then concludes that the experiences aren't present either. But only seldom in my life have I had such deep and painful experiences as I had then. One rainy day, when my tormentor had ordered me to meet him on Citadel Square, I was standing and waiting, burrowing with my toes in the wet chestnut leaves that still kept on falling from the black, draping trees. I had no money, but I had stashed away two pieces of cake which I was carrying with me so I could give Cromer something at least. I had long grown accustomed to stand around in a corner somewhere waited for him, often for a very long time, and I accepted it passively, the way people accept what can't be changed. Finally, Cromer alive. The day he didn't stay long. He gave me a couple of pokes in the ribs, laughed, he took my cake, and he offered me a damn cigarette, which I didn't take. He was more friendly than usual. Yes, he said as he was leaving. So, I don't forget, next time you could bring along your sister, the older one. What's her name anyway? I didn't understand, and I made no reply. I just looked at him in astonishment. Don't you get it? I want you to bring along your sister. I understand Cromer, but I won't. I must not, and she wouldn't come anyhow. I expected that was just another harassment and some kind of pretext. He did that frequently, making some impossible demand, frightening me, humiliating me, and then gradually arriving at some bargain. Then I would have to buy myself off with a little money or other gifts. This time he was altogether different. He was scarcely angry at me and my refusal. All right, he said offhandedly, think it over. I would like to get acquainted with your sister. You will see it's possible. All you need to do is take her along on one of your walks, then I will join you. Tomorrow I will give you a whistle, then we will talk about it again. When he was gone, I suddenly had some inkling of what his request meant. I was still totally a child, but from gossip I knew that when boys and girls were a little older, they were able to do some kind of secret, disgusting, and forbidden things with each other, and so Naya was supposed to. All of a sudden, it became clear to me how monstrous it was. At once, I resolved firmly never to do it. But I hardly dared to think what would happen next and what sort of revenge Cromer would take on me. A new kind of torture was beginning for me. The rest hadn't been enough. I walked across the empty square disconsolately, my hands in my pocket. New torments, new slavery. Then a vigorous, deep voice called to me. I got frightened and started running. Someone was running after me. A hand grasped me gently from behind. It was Max Tinian. I surrendered. It's you, I said unsteadily. You gave me such a scare. He looked at me, and his gaze had never been like that of an adult, a superior man of penetrating intelligence. Then it was now. It was a long time since we had spoken to each other. I'm sorry, he said in his polite but very resolute way. But listen, no one should let himself get so scared. Well, it can happen. Apparently, but look, if you jump like that when someone comes along who has never harmed you, that someone starts to think about it. It surprises him. It makes him curious. That someone thinks to himself, it's strange how easily you get scared. And he goes on thinking, people only act that way when they have some anxiety. Cowards always feel anxiety. But I don't think you are really a coward, right? Oh, of course, you are no hero either. There are things you are afraid of, also people you are afraid of, and there should never be any. No, no one should ever be afraid of people. You are not afraid of me, I hope. Or are you? Oh, no, not at all. There you see, but there are people you are afraid of. I don't know. Leave me alone. What do you want from me? He was keeping pace with me. I had begun to walk faster, with the idea of running away, and I felt his gaze coming from one side. Just believe, he continued, that I wish you well. At any rate, you need have no anxiety on my account. I would like to do an experiment with you. It's entertaining and you can learn something very useful from it. Pay attention. Well, from time to time, I attempt a trick called mind reading. There's no magic involved, but when you don't know how it's done, it looks very unusual. You can give people a big surprise with it. Now, let's see. You see, I like you, or I'm interested in you, and now I would like to summon up your hidden thoughts. I have already taken the first step in that direction. I scared you, and so you are easily scared. So there are things and people you are afraid of. Why should be that? No one needs to be afraid of anyone. If a person is afraid of someone, it's because he has allowed that someone to acquire power over him. For example, he's done something wrong and the other person knows it. Then he has power over you. Get it? It's surely clear, isn't it? I looked him in the face helplessly. His face was as serious and wise as always, and so kindly, but without any sentimentality. It was severe, rather. It exhibited a sense of justice or something like that. I didn't know what was going on with me. He stood in front of me like a magician. Do you understand? He asked again. I nodded. I couldn't speak. As I said, mind reading looks funny, but it's quite natural process. For example, I could also tell you fairly accurately what you thought about me when I once explained the story of Cain and Abel to you. Well, this isn't the time to do so. I think it's possible that you are dreamed about me. Well, let's drop that. You are a clever boy. Most of them are stupid. I enjoy talking from time to time with a clever boy whom I have confidence in. I hope it's all right with you. Oh, yes, only I don't understand. Let's stick to the entertaining experiment. And so we have found Boy S is easily frightened. He is afraid of somebody. He probably shares with that other person a secret that gives him some discomfort. Is that correct? More or less. As in a dream, I was captivated by his voice, his influence. I merrily nodded. Wasn't a voice speaking there that could only be issuing from myself? That knew everything better and more clearly than I myself did. Damien gave me a hard tap on the shoulder. So it's correct. I thought as much. Now, just one more question. Do you know the name of the boy who walked away from us here a while ago? I got terrifically frightened. My secret, now that had it been touched on, cringed painfully as it withdrew inside me, unwilling to face the light. What kind of a boy? There was no boy here, just me. He laughed. Speak up, he laughed was his name. I whispered. Do you mean Franz Cromer? With an air of satisfaction, he nodded to me. Bravo, you are a smart fellow. We will be friends yet. But now I have to tell you something. Brisk Cromer, or whatever his name is a bad fellow. His face tells me he is a scoundrel. What do you think? Oh, yes, I sighed. He is bad. He is a Satan. But he mustn't know any of this. For God's sake, he must not know a thing. Do you know him? Does he know you? Please be calm. He is gone, and he doesn't know me yet, but I would very much like to make his acquaintance. He attends the public elementary school. Yes. In what grade? The fifth. But say nothing to him. Please, please say nothing to him. Be calm. Nothing will happen to you. I suppose you don't feel like telling me a little more about this Cromer. I can't. No, leave me alone. He remained silent for a while. Too bad, he said then. We could have continued the experiment further, but I don't want to torture you. But do you know, right, that your fear of him is something totally improper? A fear like that ruins us. We have got to get rid of it. Do you? You have got to get rid of it if you are to become a regular person. Don't you understand? Of course, you're perfectly right, but it's impossible. You just don't know. You have seen that I know a lot, more perhaps than you would have thought. Do you owe him money? Perhaps. Yes, that's also, but that isn't the main thing. I can't tell you. I can't. So it wouldn't help if I gave you the amount you owe him. I could easily give it to you. No, no, it's not that. And I beg you, don't tell anyone about this. Not a word. You're driving me crazy. Rely on me, Sinclair. Sometime in the future, you will tell me your secrets. Never, never, I shouted violently. Just as you wish. I only mean maybe you will tell me some more sometime. Only if you are willing to, naturally. You surely don't think I would behave the same way Cromer does. Oh no. But after all, you don't know anything about it. Not a thing. I merely reflect on it. And I will never behave the way Cromer behaves. I'm sure you believe that. Besides, you don't owe me anything. We were silent for a while, and I grew calmer. But Damien's knowledge became more and more puzzling to me. I'm going home now, he said, and he drew his waterproof coat more tightly around him in the rain. I would just like to tell you one thing again. Since you have come this far, you ought to get rid of that fellow. If it can't be done any other way, kill him. I would be impressed and pleased if you did. I would even help you. I got frightened again. I suddenly recalled the story of Cain once more. The situation felt creepy, and I started to cry softly. There was too much for weirdness in the air. All right then, Maximian smiled, get along home. We will settle things yet. Though killing him would be the simplest thing, in such matters, the simplest matter is always the best. It's no good for you to remain in your friend Cromer's hands. I came home and felt as if I had been away for a year. Everything looked different. In my relations with Cromer, there was some hint of a future, of hope. I was no longer alone, and now I saw for the first time how terribly alone I had been with my secret for weeks and weeks. And the conclusion I had arrived at several times came to mind at once, that a confession to my parents would give me relief, but wouldn't save me altogether. Now I had all but confessed to someone else, to a stranger, and a premonition of redemption came to me like a heady fragrance. Nevertheless, my anxiety was still far from overcome, and I was still prepared for long, frightening confrontations with my enemy. I thus found it all the more peculiar that everything went by so quietly, in such completely secrecy and calm. Cromer's whistle outside our house wasn't to be heard for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week. I didn't dare believe it and remained mentally alert for his sudden reappearance just when least expected. But he was gone and he stayed away. Not trusting this new freedom, still didn't sincerely believe it until I once finally ran into Franz Cromer. He was walking down from Rope Markers Lane right toward me. When he saw me, winced, puckered his face into an ugly grimace, and turned right around to avoid meeting me. That was an extraordinary moment for me. My enemy was running away from me. My Satan was afraid of me. I was filled with joy and surprise. Around about that time, Damien showed up again. He was waiting for me in front of the school. Hi, I said. Good morning, Sinclair. I just wanted to find out how you are doing. Cromer is leaving you in peace now, isn't he? Was that your doing? But how? How? I don't understand it. He doesn't show up at all anymore. Good. If he should ever come back, I don't think he will, but he is a fresh kid. Then just tell him to think about Damien. But what's the connection? Did you pick a fight with him and beat him up? No, I don't like to do that. I merely spoke to him, just as I did with you, and when I did, I was able to make it clear to him that it's to his own advantage to leave you in peace. Oh, you don't give him any money, did you? No, my friend. After all, you had already tested that method. He tore himself away no matter how hard I tried to ask him all the detail, and I was left with that old uncomfortable feeling about him, that strange combination of gratitude and timidity, admiration and fear, affection and inner resistance. I resolved to see him again soon and talk to him some more about all that, and also about that business with Cain. The meeting never took place. Anyway, a gratitude isn't a virtue I believe in, and to ask if of a child would seem like a mistake to me. And so I'm not very surprised at my own total ingratitude in regard to Max Maximian. Today I firmly believe that I would have become ill and depraved for my whole life if he hadn't rescued me from Cromer's clutches. Even back then, I already perceived that liberation as the greatest event in my young life, but I left the liberator himself on the sidelines the moment he had accomplished the miracle. As I said, I don't find that ingratitude odd. The only thing I found peculiar is the lack of curiosity I displayed. How was it possible for me to go on living a single day in peace and quiet without delving into the mysteries that Damian had put me in contact with? How could I restrain the desire to hear more about Cain, more about Cromer, more about mind reading? Scarcely comprehensible, and yet it's so. I suddenly found myself disentangled from the demonic snares I just wore the I saw the world before me bright and joyous once more. I was no longer subject to anxiety attacks and heart palpitations that choked me. The spell was broken. I was no longer a lost soul in torment. I was once again a schoolboy as always. My mind and body sought to regain their equilibrium and calm as swiftly as possible, and so, above all, they made every effort to thrust away all that ugliness and menace to forget it. With miraculous speed, the whole long story of my guilt and terrorization slipped out of my memory, apparently without leaving behind any scars or impressions. Today, it is equally understandable to me that I also tried to forget me my helper and rescuer just as swiftly. I fled from the misery of my damnation, from my frightening enslavement to Cromer with every urge and force of my injured soul. I fled back to where I had earlier been happy and contented, to the lost paradise that was opening up again, to the bright world of my father and mother, to my sisters, to the fragrance of purity, to Abel's desire to please God. On the very day after my brief conversation with Gimian, when I was finally completely convinced of my regained freedom and no longer feared any relapses, I did what I had so often and so ardently wished to do. I confessed. I went to my mother, I showed her the money box with its damaged lock filled with game tokens instead of money, and I told her how long I had chained myself to a wicked torturer through my own fault. She didn't understand everything, but she saw the box, she saw the change in my expression, she heard the change in my voice, and she realized I had recovered and was restored it to her. And now, with strong emotions, I celebrated the holiday of my restitution, the realm of the prodigal son. My mother took me to my father. The story was repeated. Questions and exclamations of astonishment followed another rapidly. Both my parents stroked my head and heaved a sigh of relief from their long lasting oppressiveness. Everything was splendid. Everything was like a storybook. Everything was resolved into marvelous harmonies. Now I took refuge in that harmony with genuine passion. I couldn't sate myself sufficiently with the thought that I had regained my peace of mind and my parents' trust. I became a homebody and a model boy. I played with my sisters more than ever before, and at prayers I joined in the old hymns. I loved with the emotion of one who has been saved and converted. It came from my heart, there was nothing false about it. And yet things weren't in order. And this is the point that offers the only true explanation of the way I forgot about Damien. I should have made my confession to him. The confession would have been less decorative and touching, but it would have turned out more profitable for me. Now I was clinging with all my roots to my former heavenly world. I had returned home and had been restored to everyone's good graces. But Damien in no longer way belonged to that world. He didn't fit into it. He too, not like Cromer, but nonetheless, he too was a seducer. He too tied me to that second evil bad world, and I no longer wanted to have anything to do with it. I couldn't and wouldn't sacrifice Abel and help to glorify Cain just when I myself had become an Abel again. There was the external situation. But the mental one was this: I was free from Cromer's hand and the devil's, but not thanks to my own strength and achievement. I had tried to walk the paths of the world, and they had been too slippery for me. Now that the grasp of a friendly hand had saved me, I was running back, casting not another glance around me, to my mother's lap and the security of a sheltered, pious childhood. I made myself younger, more dependent, and more childlike than I was. I was compelled to exchange my dependency on Cromer for a new one, but I was unable to walk on my own. And so, in the blindness of my heart, I chose to be dependent on my father and mother, the beloved old bright world, which I nevertheless already knew wasn't the only one. If I hadn't done that, I would have to resort to Damien and entrust myself to him. At the time, my not doing so seemed to me to be a justifiable distrust of his disconcerting ideas, but in truth, it was nothing but fear. Because Damien would have demanded more of me than my parents demanded, much more by means of inducement and admonitions, sarcasm and irony. He would have tried to make me more self reliant. Oh, I know it today. Nothing in the world is more repugnant to a man than following the path that leads him to himself. Nevertheless, about a half year later, I couldn't resist the temptation, and on a walk with my father, I asked him what was to be thought of some people's declaration that Cain was better than evil. He was quite astonished and explained to me that this was a far from novel conception. It had even emerged in the early Christian period, being taught by sects, of one of which called itself Cainites. But naturally, that insane doctrine was nothing but an attempt by the devil to destroy our religion. Because if one believed that Cain was right and Abel was wrong, the consequence would be that God had made a mistake. In other words, that the God of the Bible wasn't the real and only one, was the false one. And in fact, the Cainites had taught and preached something like that, but that hearsay had long vanished from human ken. And his only cause for surprise was that a school chum of mine could have been able to hear anything about it. All the same, he admonished me earnestly to abandon such thoughts.